Hello everyone, it's Monday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. President Yoon Suk Yeol left on a trip today to France, where he will attend a BIE meeting in Vietnam. At the meeting in Paris, the president will deliver a speech in English as part of a presentation by South Korea supporting Busan's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. As this fourth presentation will be right before the actual selection of the host, eyes are on how South Korea will show off the port city's appeal to the 179 BIE members. What should the presentation focus on, and what strengths does Busan have compared to other candidates like Rome or Riyadh? To comment on this, we have invited Andrew Lim, the Research and Innovation Attache at the Québec Government Office in Seoul. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Andrew. President Yoon Suk Yeol will attend the BIE's General Assembly and be part of South Korea's fourth presentation in a bid to bring the 2030 World Expo to Busan. First of all, why is this fourth presentation so important?
So it's a great question. I mean, if you think about it, presidents actually going to this kind of event to present actually, and even in English, that's not a common thing. I mean, if you think about it, the other candidates, Riyadh, we mentioned MBS, for example, or Odesa, Ukraine, or if you also mentioned Italy, Rome, their presidents are definitely not traveling to go do this. And also, you mentioned fourth presentation. So it's generally the presentations, I mean, or the presenting to the members why they should actually choose the city. This, the numbers sometimes changes, but for this World Expo 2030, there will be 5 presentations in total. So this is the fourth one. And why this is very important is because it's not fully set yet. Sometimes by the fourth one, we would kind of know, okay, this city will almost get chosen, so it's not that important. But still, right now, we're not too sure.
Right.
Yes, and I've been kind of seeing gauging the audiences and seeing how this is actually playing out. And Riyadh and Busan are kind of the front runners, one could say. Yes. And in that case, in that sense, fourth presentation is very important because it kind of sets the mood. Yes, right. The last one is coming up, and the last one will be months later, and in November is the final vote. Right. And June, November, it's pretty close.
Right. So through this fourth presentation, we can try to win more votes, right?
Exactly.
Right. President Yoon Suk Yeol himself is expected to give a speech, surprisingly. What's the advantage of having the president speak? And also, a government official underlined the importance of appealing to BIE members using this uniqueness of K brand. How can such branding be used in the presentation?
So as I mentioned before, a head of state actually traveling to kind of promote this kind of event, it's not unheard of, but it's definitely not common. Right. Like I said, Italy or Ukraine, well, for reasons that we could kind of guess, their heads of states are not coming. And not only that, yes, Yoon, his first language is not English, but still he has practice, he's put in the effort, he's put in the time to actually try to present it in English, and there's a reason for that. He could have done it in Korean and do a simultaneous translation, but I'm sure using the international language to kind of spearhead this kind of movement, I think that's extremely important. So it's definitely not taken lightly. Other things that you'd want to mention is, you mentioned K-branding. Right. Yes, I think many people have heard of like K-drama or right. K-pop, but then this K-branding has been around for a long time. Like since the 2000s, they've always branded many things as K-something. It's just that back then Korea wasn't as famous, let's say. But now there's like K-food, of course, K-movies like Parasite, but even like cool things like K-quarantine, you probably have heard of a couple of years ago. Thank God it's all over now, but I mean, there's K-quarantine, sharing Korea's knowledge on how to battle COVID. But even from my own personal experience, so some of my work I do in the Quebec government is with startups. So for example, the show that most Koreans go, or many Koreans go, is the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. You probably heard of CES. Right. And many, the Ministry of Startup SMEs, Seoul government, many people go, and Korea is the second largest delegation. And in this particular event, they branded it as, they had a big booth and they branded it as K-Startup.
K-Startup.
Yes, that's pretty cool, because if you think about it, yes, there are other countries with K, like for example, like Kenya, but then obviously they don't associate themselves with this kind of branding. So Korea kind of has a monopoly on this K branding. And I think this really goes a long way, because I don't know many countries who actually do it like this. So Arirang, but also other news, they kind of named this as sales diplomacy, one could say. And I think that is kind of the President Yoon's kind of color, the way he does his diplomacies. He really wants to help the economy, so he gets out there, speaks English, and I think that it's a really big thing, because especially it goes with past gains. Because as I mentioned, they've been using this K brand for a long time, and now really we're seeing the fruits of the labor.
Right. Well, President Yoon is actually going to be accompanied by representatives of the nation's top conglomerates to support the presentation. I'd like to ask you what their presence mean and what role they could play.
This is also very interesting, because yes, I don't want to compare too much, but it's still a competition.
Right.
So if you think about like the forerunner, Saudi, yes, they're rich, they have oil, they have Aramco, but they don't have these kind of conglomerate level companies, like global companies like Samsung who make phones, or Hyundai who make cars. So in that sense, it gives you a very powerful leverage. One could say, hey, even the private sector is behind us. I'm sure the Saudi, Arabia, they have a private sector too, but it's not as developed, let's say, or it doesn't have these kind of powerful names that every person in the world, or most people in the world, would recognize. They know, we know Samsung, we use their phones, etc. I think that plays a big role. But not only that, what's really interesting is how the President Yoon, the current administration, and the conglomerates work together. So this is a little bit research that I did, and it can be a little bit internal, but how they do this kind of a collaboration is the president kind of works together, conglomerates, and tells them, hey, you take charge of these 30 countries, and LG is like, you take these 20, and Hyundai, you take these 30. It's because they have presence around the world, and they have already these relationships. So they kind of tap into that relationship as well. And how they can assign the countries, for example, maybe POSCO, for example, they are building battery factories in Quebec. So they have this kind of leverage. So they could tell them, hey, maybe you could take the Canadian part and try to kind of promote this and leverage with them. And I think that is something no other country could really do. Maybe the US, but I mean, US is not part of this bid. So I think that plays a huge role in kind of securing this kind of bid.
Right. So leaders of conglomerates all being there could show us how the public sector and the private sector could work together to support the presentation. President Yoon pointed out that the presentation is an opportunity to showcase the distinctive vision of the Busan Expo. Now, what is it about Busan City that gives it a competitive edge compared to other countries' candidates?
Yes, another great question, because people would wonder why Busan? Like, yes, Odesa, maybe they're having some issues right now, but like Riyadh's it's a proper city, it's a capital city, it's a metropolis, so why Busan? I think one of the biggest things that people might not think about too much, but if you think about this, is 2030. So it's 7 years from now. Yes, I'm sure the world will be fine, but then you never know. Yes, we just had Corona, which is probably like a once-in-a-generation thing, but still, who knows, 2030, something might happen. But I think Busan, or Korea overall, is in a very good situation to be able to handle most things that we think might happen, like diseases. Korea has plenty of, we mentioned quarantine, they have a lot of experience. The other like instabilities like weather, things like that. We have great experience with that as well. So I think that is one of the biggest things. Will Busan still be, or Korea, for example, or even Asia, but mostly Korea, will it be in a good position in 2030? Because we could think about even like climate change. Yes, certain countries, maybe in the Middle East, maybe they're already battling desertification, and it's quite hot out there. And yes, Busan gets hot too, but I mean, if you compare to the other cities, these kind of stability issues. Of course, there's many other competitiveness too. If you think about the other cities, Busan has a waterfront.
Right.
It's a very famous beach. Yes, Haeundae, we all know that. And that kind of waterfront comes with the culture. Yes, a little bit of partying too, but not necessarily just that. The alcohol, the festivities, and I mean, yes, you go to the exhibition and you could go chill at the beach.
Right, it has a lot to offer.
Yes, these kind of things, all the cities do not have this kind of competitive edge. So I think it's a very big deal.
Right, good to hear. Now, I believe this would be the last question, Andrew, but recently it is said that some voters that were originally in favor of Riyadh changed their minds and will vote for Busan as they chose to engage with Seoul on the topic of sustainable economic development. What can Busan show in terms of this area?
So this is actually one of the main reasons why I think Korea is kind of spearheading this Expo bid. So yes, Expo is great. It promotes Busan culture, all that stuff too. but it's also a time to showcase innovative technology.
Right.
You know, it could be automated vehicles, hydrogen tech, all that stuff. So Busan's already working on this. Busan is also, you probably know, is famous for their ports. It's probably around the top 10, or I would say the fifth biggest container port in the world. So they're already starting to kind of innovate in this way. So one really cool technology I want to mention, it's called smart piezoelectric system.
What is that?
So what this is we would think, okay, there's some kind of renewable system, maybe solar, whatnot, but no. Why I mentioned this is you could imagine in ports there's a lot of movement, or to be more specific, vibrations. And you know, trucks going in and out and all the sound from the huge container trucks and all that creates a lot of vibration. So this is kind of using vibrations or kinetic energy to generate energy.
Oh.
I think this is pretty cool.
Yeah,
because we've heard of solar and all that, but this, they've already had a pilot project and they want to expand on this program. So this is one of the cool sustainable features. Also, you probably know Korea is one of the leaders in hydrogen energy. So they also they're working on this now to kind of showcase this when Busan Expo actually happens. So many of the big players like SK, Hyundai, they've already signed an agreement to kind of get this going too. There's also the floating city, I probably mentioned in some other episodes as well. They announced building a floating city in the northern port of Busan to showcase many new technologies, because you know, climate change, you know, there are the waters will rise, all that stuff. So hey, why not start working on this technology now? So by 2030, we'll be a leader.
Right, I see. Now, that's all the questions I have, Andrew. Let's have our fingers crossed to see successful fourth presentation. Thank you for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
All right. Now, while in France, President Yoon is also expected to hold a summit with French President Emmanuel Macron on the Élysée Palace in Paris on Tuesday local time. What discussions are expected to take place between the two leaders, and how significant is this summit? For more on this, we invited Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy into the studio. Professor Min, thank you for your time.
My pleasure always.
All right, first question. The two presidents are expected to share their plans and views regarding the Indo-Pacific region. What's the gist of each country's plan, and in what ways could they cooperate?
Yes, as you mentioned, President Yoon will hold a summit meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday in Paris, and it will wrap up a series of summits with the leaders of all member states of the Group of Seven and the European Union, conducted over the past 2 months.
Right.
And the President's office announced that Yoon government pursues universal values like freedom, human rights, and the rule of law. And France is the origin of these universal values. So in the upcoming summit, there will be in-depth conversations about expanding cooperation between the two countries, South Korea and France, based on the universal values that two countries share. Specifically, it is expected that the two leaders will exchange their opinions about Indo-Pacific region based on their own Indo-Pacific strategy, and talk about cooperation on international security issues like Ukraine war and North Korea, and deal with artificial intelligence, space, and cutting-edge future industries. So I think that there will be various issues on security, economy, technology, and culture and human exchanges on the table in the upcoming summit.
Right, I see. Now, recently, Professor, President Yoon Suk Yeol actually wrote an op-ed in the French newspaper Le Figaro, and he highlighted possible cooperation on international security issues with France as South Korea became the non-permanent member of the UN Security Council for 2024 to 2025. How could collaboration develop between the two countries in the international arena?
Yeah, in the newspaper contribution, President Yoon emphasized that South Korea and France share the universal values like the freedom, human rights, the international law. And he pointed out that the rule-based international order is in jeopardy, and that the two countries needed to closely work together to cope with the challenge. And the President Yoon also mentioned that as a non-permanent member of the 2024 and 2025 UN Security Council, South Korea is ready to cooperate closely with France on international security. In particular, he mentioned that South Korea would continue to support for Ukraine.
Right.
In addition, President Yoon expressed his appreciation for France's consistent condemnation of North Korea's nuclear and missile programs and support for South Korea. I think that what President Yoon mentioned in the newspaper contribution provide useful clue about what the two leaders will discuss in the upcoming summit.
Right.
So I think specifically as members of the UN Security Council, the South Korea, the permanent member, and the France and the permanent member, the two countries will closely work together in order to cope with international security issues, including consistently supporting Ukraine to peacefully end the war and securing freedom of navigation and enhancing maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region, and persuading and pushing North Korea not to make another military provocation and bringing it back to the negotiating table for denuclearization.
Right, so they will be able to collaborate in a wide range of issues, including Ukraine and North Korea. Moving on to the economic ties. Both of the countries are already enjoying strong economic relations with their bilateral trade volume reaching $13 billion last year. But how can each country further benefit the other economically? And what kind of cooperation could be sought in terms of high-tech industries?
Yes, basically it is expected that economic issues will be mainly discussed in the upcoming summit with the international security issues. In his contribution to the French newspaper, President Yoon emphasized that South Korea and France needed to strengthen their economic partnership. He said that economic cooperation between the two countries needed to contribute to building a stable and resilient global supply chain. Specifically, if France makes investments in South Korea's the semiconductor, large volume battery, digital industry, and in return, South Korea makes investments in France's aerospace industry, there will be a great complementary effect and economic benefit for both countries. In addition, President Yoon suggested that South Korea and France will be able to work together for nuclear power and defense industries that are competitive in both countries. So in the upcoming summit, it is likely that the two leaders will confirm that the two countries, South Korea and France, are reliable and important economic partners for each other. And they talk about how they will work together to establish a stable and resilient global supply chain and how they can improve their cooperation in the cutting-edge future industries like battery, semiconductor, large volume battery, and digital aerospace, nuclear power, and defense industries. We can see that there are lots of the blue ocean things for the economic cooperations between the two countries. And considering that a large volume of the economic delegations will be accompanied in the presidential visit to France this time, it is expected that they will strengthen ties and enhance cooperation with their French counterparts during the visit.
Right, I see. Now, Professor, other than the bilateral summit between the President Yoon Suk Yeol and French President, President Yoon is expected to attend the dialogue with future generations and also be part of the Digital Vision Forum as well. What item on his schedule caught the most in your eye, and what do you expect from it?
Well, in his, again, the contribution to the French newspaper, President Yoon also pointed out that South Korea and France needed to strengthen their cultural partnership, including human exchange. He mentioned that the Korean film Parasite won their prize at the Cannes Film Festival, as well as the BTS and Blackpink. And he also expressed his hope that the cultural partnership between South Korea and France would become more special. Right? So I think that the dialogue for future generations and the Digital Vision Forum will provide a meaningful momentum for strengthening cultural and economic partnerships for the future generations between the two countries. As you know, improving human exchange based on the cultural interests is one of useful ways to enhance mutual trust and strengthen ties between two countries. And that will be definitely the case for the relationship between South Korea and France.
Right, no boundaries for cooperation. I'd like to ask you more questions, but since we are running out of time, I believe this will be the last question. The presidential office pointed out that President Yoon's summit with his French counterpart will wrap up a series of summits with the leaders of all member states of G7 and EU, like you said before, for over a little more than 2 months. What significance does it have? Could you briefly tell us?
Okay, so I talked about what President Yoon will discuss with the French counterpart in the upcoming summit. He will talk about the security, economy, technology, and the culture and human exchanges. I think that those main agendas in the upcoming summit clearly shows what South Korea want to do with the G7 countries and the European Union. So based on the value diplomacy, specifically, the South Korea want to strengthen its ties with European countries that share the universal values, and it want to closely work together with them to preserve the rule-based international order and to build a stable and resilient global supply chain. So personally, I think that South Korea is getting closer to the group of 7, and it is likely that South Korea will take more active roles and responsibilities in the international community as a global pivotal country.
All right, that's all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Min, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.